Hello and welcome to an Infinity the Game battle report. Today we're playing Vanilla Jing featuring a Hsien Warrior Lieutenant +1 order as a viewer request against Kestrel Colonial Force, and the scenario is Evacuation. Now, before we dive into the lists for this particular battle report, a quick note about this viewer request. This request comes from channel supporter Amrafan Santiago, and Amrafan's request reads that they would like a Vanilla Yuching battle report in which I build a list around the Hsien Warrior +1 order lieutenant as an active turn piece, button pushing, kind of do it myself lieutenant, since it's a specialist operative. Now, Amrafin goes on to talk a little bit about the possibility maybe of using a decoy for the Hsien Warrior because the Daoying lieutenant is a willpower 14 lieutenant and much more common, so perhaps a camouflage marker in the deployment zone could fake people out pretending to be a Daoying to enable the Hsien Warrior to perhaps go undetected as the lieutenant for a period of time. Maybe bait out an attack run against a piece that ultimately isn't as vulnerable as my opponent thinks it is. But then kind of concludes with what I presume is an acknowledgement of the probable limitations here with can it be done and is it good? Big question mark. And I think it's in the spirit of that acknowledgement that there are limits to what can be considered good or even viable in Infinity, and some profiles do push up against those limits that we'll jump into the army list and talk about what we're playing today. Now, I was of very mixed opinions when it came to this viewer request, and in fact, full disclosure, this viewer request has sat in my to-do list for some time now. Because while I am of the opinion that there is almost no regiment in this game that does not have some kind of an interesting use case, the same can't always be said for profiles. Although they are a lot rarer in Infinity N5 than they were, say, in N3, there are still the occasional junk profile in N5. Profiles that maybe are part of a regiment that overall has some very interesting things that you might use about it, but that profile we don't bother with. That's not what makes this regiment good. And for example, when we are looking at the Hsien Warrior, any of the heavy machine gun profiles are obviously really sound and really interesting. Maybe not perfectly efficient, you are paying for willpower 14, you are paying for some martial arts and close combat that ideally you will never use on the Hsien Warrior, but even with these small points increases that will come from, for example, paying for a DACCW, the Hsien Warrior is otherwise an MSV2, heavy infantry, heavy machine gun, in two factions, each of which has very ample access to smoke, so you can smoke shoot with a robust platform that does not have to worry about being crit and losing one wound in the same way that things like, say, an Intruder or an Epsilon do. And with native ballistic skill 14, you are very close to the high watermark for smoke shooting in terms of any platform that is even remotely affordable. And that's really cool. And so I think there's no contention that Hsien Warriors as a regiment are not just playable or even viable, but fantastic, and we'll see plenty of play. But there are profiles within the Hsien Warrior Regiment that are like, well, this profile doesn't do any of those things. And that's where we get to the Lieutenant +1 Order Specialist Operative. Because this guy is just, okay, in the strictest sense, he's not bad, which I think is what came from, is what, like, where Amrafan's request kind of came from. If we ignore the points cost of this model entirely, it is a reasonably fast 6-2, willpower 14, specialist operative, with 2 lieutenant orders in factions with access to fairly solid chain of command that can theoretically move out onto the field and do specialist things themselves while being kind of a reasonably robust platform. And that would be fine for like 25 points. That would be great at 25, 26, 30, like that kind of points level. But because the Hsien Warrior is still packing martial arts that aren't good enough to actually make it a close combatant but do increase its point cost, and a bunch of equipment that obviously expects it to be a gunfighter but armed with nothing but a multi-rifle, it costs a whopping 48 points, which is to say it is very nearly a sixth of your entire force for a model that really does not pose any significant danger to your opponent relative to the points cost. Now, I don't mind multi-rifles or multi-marksman rifles. They are not inherently bad weapons, but they are inherently limited weapons. They are fine on pieces that are like single wound, semi-elite, light and medium infantry that need a middleweight firepower piece that just means they are at least something of a threat to some of the things around them. Multi-marksman rifles on Cyclops, for example, in O12, I do not like the fact that they're damage 7, but given what I am paying for those pieces, I accept that that's a necessary limitation. But the Hsien Warrior is 48 points, and I cannot spend 48 points in good conscience on a model with a damage 7 weapon. The Hsien Warrior is just too expensive in the overwhelming majority of cases to be considered as a piece, particularly given that going and pressing buttons in the midfield and accomplishing mission objectives is something ideally that can be accomplished by a large number of pieces in your force. But in the spirit of engaging with this challenge and giving the Hsien Warrior the fairest possible shake, I have waited until I had an opportunity to play a scenario where I can actually use him and I think he's actually doing something valuable. And there are a few cases where I think that might be the case, but one of them that I think he's actually moderately well suited to is the scenario we're playing today, which is Evacuation. And there are a couple of reasons for that. The first is that while Evacuation is a scenario, it doesn't have an exclusion zone, it nominally rewards infiltration. There are multiple HVTs that will usually be deployed, they will be quite close to your deployment zone, within 4 inches of your deployment zone in point of fact, that are pieces you will want to interact with, and Evacuation is a hugely order-intensive scenario. Anyone who has played Evacuation will know that it always takes more orders than you think to even come close to scoring the points that you need to score a major victory in Evacuation. It is intensely order-intensive. And so we have, specifically in Evacuation, a situation where actually I'm fine if my mobile specialist starts in or near my deployment zone, because I'm going to be leaving my deployment zone heading toward the first HVT I want to evacuate, but I want a piece that can probably survive for multiple turns, reach the midfield, maybe survive there or even pull back, and so has potentially lots of orders that they might spend over the course of the game, rather than just having the sugar hit boost of efficiency that comes from having an infiltrating specialist who, yes, they start in the right location, but they don't generate orders turn on, turn on, turn. On top of that, in the current ITS season, the specialist bonus in Evacuation is a forward observer specialist bonus, which outside of Ariadna is actually not necessarily what you'll be using for your specialists in generalist missions. So the fact that the Hsien Warrior is a specialist operative rather than some other kind of specific specialist is not really holding it back. Willpower 14 is kind of fine to do this mission. And so here, in this very narrow use case, we are going to give the Hsien Warrior the fairest possible shake. Now, notwithstanding Amrafin's suggestion about like a fake Dao Ying, we haven't done any of that. You don't have the points for that kind of silly luxury in a list that is already committing to a Hsien Warrior, particularly if you want to possibly also indulge in a few other silly luxuries that I wanted to try in the next Vanilla Yuching list that I played. And so instead we are just going with a simple and sensible chain of command in the form of the Pheasant Imperial Agent Mine Layer. It's going to be duoed with a Moang NCO. Now, if I have to use that Pheasant Agent to do mission stuff in this mission, it is inevitably going to have to break the link because you will need to civvy back a civilian. But I figure the Moang is reasonably durable and a possible outlet for those lieutenant orders if I can't spend them in any given turn, and can at least get the Pheasant Agent into the midfield or near to an enemy HVT. The Pheasant Agent at that point can break the link and start legging it back toward the console. Moang is just generally solid and valuable. Now, the Moang actually is an interesting kind of case in point of what I think it takes to tolerate a damage 7 weapon, right? The Moang is cheaper than the Hsien Warrior, just as a point of comparison, right? Talking about these pieces, the Moang is cheaper than the Hsien Warrior, but for many people still only just comes in as a, okay, yes, this is a viable piece, mostly in recognition of what you need to have on a profile to make up for a damage 7 weapon on an expensive primary firepower piece. The Moang is 44 points, which is expensive by any measure, and as its main gun, it is relying on a damage 7 Red Fury, but firstly, the Red Fury is at least burst 4, so you can usually rely on scoring a couple of hits in any given volley, and then beyond that, the Moang is an incredible profile. It is 2 wounds, armor 5, and has no wound in cap, and is an NCO, and has mimetism, and has a decent sidearm in the form of the AP Heavy Pistol, and has a Disco Baller, and has a Flamen Spear. Like, the total package of the Moang, despite the fact that its weapon damage is low because it has a Red Fury, the total package is, frankly, in my opinion, excellent, and even in the opinion of certain Moang haters, it is still at least a pretty playable piece. Because of all of these extras, that is what it takes for a primary gunfighting element to be damage 7 and still be good. The Hsien Warrior does not have any of those qualities. Anyway, enough shitting on the Hsien Warrior. Moving on. Now, as much as I celebrated the freedom from the tyranny of the Guangxi package in N5, it is still something that Yuqing has access to, and we are using it to forgive a multitude of vanity pieces in this particular list. We are taking a Celestial Guard Monitor and 4 Guangxi. We're also going to have 3 Shaolin Monks and a Libertos in this list. And if you're thinking, wow, that's an awful lot of really cheap stuff, what are you doing apart from taking the Hsien Warrior? We can answer that in the next two pieces. We have a Yanhuo HRMC and a Hacktow missile launcher. Now, I will admit that the Yanhuo, I think it's very good, but I will say it's kind of bordering on a vanity pick in N5, just because it competes very closely with the Hayate Warrior. The Hate unit, rather, is also Ballistic Skill 14, also Armor 5, BTS 6, 2 wounds, it's also a Warhorse, and it even has an Assault Pistol. All you are losing is you are gaining tactical awareness, and you are exchanging the Hyper Apokinetic Cannon for an APHMG. The only thing that you are really notably losing relative to the Yanhuo, firstly, is the incredible coolness of the Yanhuo sculpt, but secondly, immunity armor on the Yanhuo. Now, is immunity armor worth 7 points and giving up tactical awareness? No, probably not. And for that reason, the actual use case of the Yanhuo in many cases is, I would like a second gun please after the Hete unit. But in this case, I have taken all of the liberties necessary to forgive the vanity piece, and I painted my Yanhuo recently. It was like 80% done for about 3 years. I finished it off in the last couple of months, so damn it, we are using it, and that immunity armor would actually end up really, really mattering this game. Then in Combat Group 2, we have a Hacktow. Now, the Hacktow is a piece that picked up +1 burst on its missile launcher in N5, and so has been sitting patiently on my list of units to play in Vanilla Yuqing basically since the beginning of the edition. And that +1 burst, I think, is probably really, really significant. Now, this is a 60-point model, that's hugely expensive, but when you have Ballistic Skill 14, Mimetism 6, potentially Surprise Attack, I saw instances in N4 of the regular flat burst 1 missile launcher Hacktow actually being used as an offensive piece in some cases, and it was never truly successful, but it was shockingly close for a piece that otherwise is just a Noctifor on every ounce of crack in the galaxy. And the fact that at burst 2 you have really quite a good chance of putting your opponent on sufficiently bad negative modifiers that they can't hit you or can't reasonably hit you, and you can land just one hit with the missile launcher in active turn, one hit with the missile launcher is usually all you need to accomplish your goals. And so I have wanted to play the Hacktow for quite a while now, and this was, look, since I'm shackling myself to the damn Hsien Warrior Lieutenant and taking all of these Guangxi, etc., I may as well. Let's put the vanity pick in and see how it goes. Otherwise, as noted, there is a Liberto, a couple of Shaolin, and a single Zanshi Yixing Doctor with a Yao Zhao. Now, she is going to sit hanging around the sit hanging around the Yanhuo, kind of looking like that's her job to bring the Yanhuo back, but the goal is to also have the Hacktow either near her or near the Yao Zhao, ready to be recovered if necessary, because one of the few pieces of psychic damage you can really truly give your opponent reliably in a game like Infinity is to recover an ARO piece like the Yanhuo if it does go down. So, is this list a good list? Well, it's certainly got a bunch of pretty solid elements in it. Would it be better if it didn't have a Hsien Warrior Lieutenant? Probably yes. But noting that there are a couple of vanity picks in this list, this is the most red hot crack I can possibly give him, given the scenario I think is the one case you would use him. So let's give him a shot and see how he goes. Now, today we're playing against Kestrel Colonial Force, piloted by my good friend Owen, running a Kestrel Colonial Force list that I can only describe as possibly the most cursed points I have seen in any list I have played against in this edition so far, and actually, genuinely, I think coming in at 4 SWC is not something you should be aiming to do with Kestrel Colonial Force much of the time. This is just a sample platter list. Owen has made a couple of accommodations to play into the scenario, but they are not accommodations that I would generally recommend under general circumstances. Kestrel Colonial Force, although they do have access to disco balls on the excellent Fennec Fusiliers, are still a Panoshianian faction, which means you are usually going to want to spend most, if not all, of your SWC on solid heavy weapons and other pieces, because this is Pan-Oceania. It's a firepower faction. It has access to good firepower pieces. It does not really want to be using Fennec Fusiliers to throw out disco balls to try and move its way forward and accomplish the mission objective that way. You can play Kestrel that way, and I have played against Kestrel actually making use of visibility control, and it's very interesting. But you have a strength in this faction. You should probably leverage it. The fact that Owen is kind of undergunned in this particular list is going to come back and bite him in this game by about turn 3, when it kind of materializes as a weakness that I am able to exploit. So with that caveat, with the note that if you're a Kestrel player or a prospective Kestrel player and you're looking at lists on this channel, if you are interested in this style of a list, put more guns in there. Put like one more gun in there, find the points. You can find the points. You are not going to regret it. Anyway, in terms of the list, otherwise, it's a pretty solid sample platter of good pieces with maybe like one more non-gun fighting piece than you might ideally like because kind of the scenario. We have a Magistrate Lieutenant, the cheap profile, that's kind of the correct choice, with a couple of Jackals. This is an excellent fire team. Haris gives you a ton of orders for cheap, as well as the other benefits of Strategos. We have a Peacemaker Mine Layer, again, an excellent profile. You can, in Kestrel, usually afford like one piece like this that is a defensive element. There's perhaps one too many in this list, but totally fine. A Fugazi Drone Bot, a Mule Bot. The Mule Bot is there to reload things like the Disco Ball if needed. A Machinist. Machinist, a good choice when you have a tag. This one has an armed turret combi rifle, which I think you don't really want to pay points for anymore after the nerf to turrets. And particularly given that this list is already playing a couple of points down, cutting the combi off of that Machinist and using those points in addition with some points you might cut elsewhere to accommodate another big gun in the list is sort of a change that I would make. But the Machinist itself is quite valuable because the next piece we have is a Squallow. Now, I like basically all of the Squallow's profiles, but I do particularly like the non-NCO HMG. I think in this list, because you have Strategos, you can still make use of the NCO Squallow by what you do is you put it in the other fire team from the Magistrate, so you can optionally not use Strategos if you need the order in that combat group. It gives you a bit of flexibility in how the orders are spent. But if we are running a Strategos Magistrate and the Squallos is in the primary combat group, I do not mind taking just the regular rather than the multi-HMG at all, because access to the grenade launcher is really nice and flexible. We then have a Yamabushi Paramedic. Now this is not a camouflage model, it's an FDO, but as mentioned in this scenario, having a specialist that can move moderately quickly, Yamabushi is pretty cheap as well. It's a reasonably good choice for doing things like grabbing the near HVT and making a run towards console relatively cheaply and efficiently. In Combat Group 2, we then have a big fire team of Fennec Fusiliers, led by a Griffin. We have Bipandra in there as well, and then 3 Fennecs, 1 Thunderbolt with triangulated fire, 1 Hacker, and 1 Forward Observer and Disco Baller. Now, this is mostly going to serve as a relatively static fire base, although it does have the option of moving out thanks to Bipandra. She's not the tactical awareness one, actually. Sorry, I disregard that. I thought she was a attack aware one. She's not. Now, she is a very reliable doctor to do things like recover the Griffin, but in this situation, she is another piece that you could trim all. You could actually cut her entirely and just run 4, right? Griffin and 3 Fennec Fusiliers. The Griffin counts as a Fusilier. It would still be getting the +1 ballistic skill from having that team of 4. You could cut Bipandra. We have SWC spare. We trim a few points elsewhere, and then bam, all of a sudden we have another gun. That's the kind of change that I would be expecting to make. Or if you wanted to keep Bipandra, we cut the armed turret off the Machinist and make her the tactical awareness profile. Both of those are good options and things we could do in this list just to tweak it slightly, but again, this is not tournament practice. We're not paying for sheep stations. This is just a bunch of stuff that Owen was using to experiment with Kestrel Colonial Force. Now, finally, we have a Scarecrow Forward Observer, and this guy is very efficiently built for this scenario. This is a Forward Observer in a scenario with a Forward Observer bonus, and it is well positioned to grab, exfiltrate HVTs, and then do it again turn after turn. A good choice if you are building specifically for evacuation, which Owen and I are both doing. In more general lists, the Scarecrow Forward Observer is a piece that I would either consider exchanging for a hacker, or cutting entirely as part of that search for a third gun. In this case, though, it had a pretty clear job to do, so let's from there jump into the game and see how everything went. Now, I've won the lieutenant role and I have elected to go first. Owen has started to set up second on the left side of the table over here. And both of us have done something pretty similar, which is identify. So the table edge is basically right here behind. It terminates this building, abuts the table edge. And that means that both of us have a position where we can hide our HVTs in a manner that is quite defensible. And from both sides of the table can kind of be locked down via Overwatch from your deployment zone and even deployable weapons. And while there is a console just here, so we can, like, you can potentially like loop up and around, potentially accessing like the HVTs on both sides, circling past the central console here in order to drop them off, right? This is a potentially high value scenario area. The relative defensibility of the HVT positions means it's going to be, for lack of a better term, a tough nut to crack for both players attempting to get to the high value targets located on the left and right of this particular building. Now, on my part, I've secured the two high-value targets that I've positioned there, and then, of course, the actual scenario civilian that is deployed in that position, right? So we've each got a large number of civilians in these areas. I've secured that with my Libertos, and then as much Overwatch as I can kind of put on it. There is a Guangxi that is deployed up against the table edge here that is going to run forward and then just be a corner guard there for the rest of the game. There's a Shaolin monk potentially ready to do the same thing. I have deployed my Hsien warrior lieutenant as the reserve drop on the stairs of this building, ready to move up and around. As soon as I identified that Owen put his HVTs in the same position, that was my reserve drop, but he was my reserve drop in part because we're trying to give him a fair shake, but also because I did expect him to have to be doing a fair bit of scenario work this game. And then on this rooftop, we have, on this balcony slash rooftop area, we have the Yanhuo, and then the Hack Tower itself is going to be reserve drop here in this space, kind of near enough to the Yanhuo to serve as a secondary firepower piece, but also the Yao Zhao from the Doctor is hanging out inside this building, ready to heal either of them if needed. The Doctor herself is safe on this rooftop. She can move down and around if she absolutely has to. There are some pieces around here that she might want to recover, including the Moang duoed with the Pheasant rank. The Pheasant's Mad Trap is behind this building. And then there's just a smattering of Guangxi and Shaolin monks all over the place. It's just various low-value order and smoke generators everywhere else. The key pieces are the four heavy infantry, three of which are in or around this building, and then of course the Moang and the Pheasant rank, ready to move out on this side of the table if needed. Now, for Owen's part, he's adopted a pretty similar kind of deployment. He doesn't have the Libertos, but he does have the Peacemaker and its Oxbot, and so they are securing Owen's side of this building. The Peacemaker itself is hunkered down behind this barricade, but then the Oxbot and the Oxbot's mines are positioned much more aggressively, ready to deal with anyone that comes and tries to get these HVTs. The Griffin fire team, along with the Fusiliers, are all in and around this building, kind of mirroring my firebase. The Griffin is standing here on ARO duty, watching quite a bit of the table. This is a relatively open table, there's kind of enough terrain, but there are some fairly wide fields of fire, nothing that you can't block with a smoke grenade, but the Griffin, of course, is an MSV1 shooter. After that, we have the Haris team of the Jackal and the Magistrate hanging out. The Magistrate itself is hanging out nice and safe. I think the Magistrate is down here. The two Jackals are on this rooftop, able to stand up if they need to, but they are prone to begin with. The Yamabushi will deploy prone down here, ready to go after this HVT, and then make a nice safe run towards this objective if it gets a chance at some point during the game. And then the Squalloss is going to be the reserve drop, and it's basically just deploying somewhere that is relatively safe because Owen does not want it to fight the Yanhuo. And so it's deploying back here, where the only really credible threats to it from this position here would involve maybe the Moang coming up and around, and the Moang is not particularly a threat to a Squallow. The Moang is very much armed with a damage 7 weapon. I could feasibly try and bring a Shaolin monk up and around to deal with the Squallows, but that would be very order intensive. It would not be able to get past the Griffin Fueback with this long line. And even if it did somehow do that, the Yamabushi back here would pretty ably defend the Squallows. So the Squallows is nice and safely positioned here, ready to be an active piece in Owen's turn 1, but I am going first. Now, most of my turns in this game will be pretty simple because my list is not one with a lot of moving parts. It's really just, unlike my usual lists, which try and have 10 or 12 things which might do complex and interesting things to interact with the game, this list is a bunch of Guangxi and 4 and a bit active pieces. And so, in terms of the group 2 orders, the Libertos was able to sneak up outside of line of sight of the Griffin, right? The Griffin was mostly looking down in this direction. So the Libertos' job was basically to run up and around here, dodge the mine, move out, shotgun the Oxbot, and die to the Oxbot's flamethrower. Now that is nominally kind of a bad trade in terms of value, but the Oxbot and the mine were guarding a pair of high-value targets and a civilian, and so just clearing this particular way, yes, it was worth the 8 points, particularly given the Libertos is left behind a mine. That cost all of my orders from Combat Group 2, no problem. Combat Group 1 is equally similar. Firstly, the Yan Ho stands up and goes brrrt and takes, I think, 3 or 4 orders to dislodge and eventually suppress the Griffin. The Griffin actually beats it in a face-to-face roll a couple of times, including one crit, but, and this is one of the situations where the Yan Ho does genuinely be worth the extra points over the Heite, the Griffin has the flare back, I am immunity armor. And so despite copping 1 regular and 1 critical hit back to the dome, the Yan Ho just loses 1 wound and carries on with the fight. Absolute legend. I do in time suppress the Griffin, it drops back down, it takes 1 wound and it goes prone, at which point I start spending lieutenant orders, and I only have so many orders here and my intention is not to get feisty, so I just use the Hsien warrior to come up and around. Now, cognizant of the fact that Owen has only 14 troopers visible, I do drop some smoke here with the Shaolin monks irregular, come up and around, pick up this HVT, run through to here, drop the HVT off into the beacon, and then basically just run all the way back to where he was. Now, is that a particularly good first turn? I have done a single, I haven't stripped any orders from Owen's entire combat group. I have wounded the Griffin, and I have dealt with some of the defenses in this position here. But what I have done, for lack of a better term, is banked orders into the scenario. This scenario is very, very order intensive. It takes lots of orders to accomplish all of your goals in this scenario, and getting even just 1 high value target done and accomplished is kind of worthwhile. Now, there are also 2 classifieds in this scenario, but my list is crap at doing them because 2 of my best heavy infantry are headquarters troops. Thanks, Hsien Warrior. It's fantastic that you're not elite or veteran. I really love that. But with 0 hackers, again, don't play Yuching list with 0 hackers, but with 0 hackers, I couldn't do any of the hacking classifieds that I drew, so I had a couple that could only be done by veteran, chain of command, or elite troopers, and so I was basically just hoping that this little Joe in the corner here might at some point accomplish them. Spoiler alert, they would not. This is not going to be a high-scoring game. Now, this is the position at the end of my first turn. The Hsien Warrior remains completely non-visible, but he is running back to here and is hiding. We can see that the HVT that was over here has gone. I've exfiltrated it, and we've got a Guangxi that has moved up to this position here as a deployment, like a corner guard on the 2 high-value targets I have clustered up against this building. Now, Owen's turn is going to involve actually some interesting decision-making points for me in particular, because the first thing he does, again, is kind of just mirror my point of play, which is, okay, let's just bank some scenario points. And so the Scarecrow reveals itself. It was actually sitting basically directly next to this civilian. It grabs the civilian, moves around here, and after a little bit of fumbling, because it does have to take, I think it takes 2 goes to get the civilian, because this willpower is not great, gets the civilian, moves it around to here, shoots the civilian up into space, and then pulls back and around and ends up recamouflaging behind this barricade, prone behind this barricade. Now, that's a pretty sound use of orders. Those are all orders from Combat Group 2, but it does end up taking something like the full 6 orders in that combat group, including the Scarecrow's hidden deployment order, to get all of that done due to some failed willpower rolls actually getting the civilian in the first place. And that's a very significant number, because in terms of the firepower pieces that Owen has access to, it is the linked Griffin that is the greatest threat to my Hacktow. And once the 6th order in this combat group has been spent, the Hacktow is the Hacktow is no longer under threat by the Griffin, because the Griffin is prone. And that means that when Owen proceeds to his first combat group and starts spending orders, and begins by moving the Yamabushi up and around here, I can reveal the Hacktow and take a shot, because I know that the Hacktow is now only going to be engaged by Owen's Squallow, and the Squallow is not really a fantastic piece for fighting an Armor 5 Mimetism 6 missile launcher in ARO. Now, the Yamabushi makes its dodge, actually dodges out of line of sight, is able to get around the other side of the civilian, does actually end up grabbing the civilian in subsequent order, and it'll come around here to hide. It's not necessarily hugely pinned down by the Hacktow. Now, what it probably should have done, if it could, was to find a way to come maybe up and around this way and just get those points, right? Don't kill anything in mind. It's not the end of the world. Get those points, bank this particular object, this HVT, and be the person who now has 2 regular civilians that have been shot up into space. But instead, Owen is like, all right, let's just see how bad this Hacktow fight is, because one of the things that you do run into when you're engaging missile launchers is that you can range in under them, and that can be quite effective. And so for now, he is content to just pull the Yamabushi back to a safe position here and move out with the Squallow. And the Squallow is actually going to move, it can move in, like weaving in and around between these buildings, and actually get all the way up to here and come around the building, this building here, and engage. And this ends up being like exactly 17 inches, which is pretty much perfect because that means that the Squallow has gotten inside of 24, which puts the Hacktow at 0 range band -3 for cover, but it's still in good range. So this Squallow is able to fire 4 shots with its heavy machine gun on 9s versus 1 shot from the Hacktow on 11s. But all of those numbers are kind of low. And basically what happens is that a whole bunch of orders get spent and the firefight is totally inconclusive. I think the Hacktow ends up getting hit once or twice, but its armor holds. The Squallow actually does get hit once and it takes a wound from the missile hit, but that is all. Just a whole bunch of G.I. Joe firefights with like munitions firing everywhere. Ultimately, the Squallow gets jack of it, decides it doesn't want to be exposed in that position, and will pull all the way back around to here and end its turn behind this building. Now we can see that here, this is not a totally unexposed position, right? Theoretically, I could actually bring the Moang up and around and look at the Squallow from a position where I have it out of cover. But I would have to do that, I had a look at this, I would actually need to get all the way down. I would need to come up and around here and take this position to actually have the Squallow in proper enfilade. And while I did seriously consider that as an approach, without the Griffin standing, and with the Squallow in a relatively conservative position, I decided it was time to actually go about winning the mission to the extent that I could. And so instead, this is also going to be a very simple turn. In terms of the orders that we have access to in our second combat group, which even with the Hacktow having revealed are quite limited, the Hacktow will end up, I think, maybe repositioning or recamouflaging. I will otherwise just have Shaolin monks throw smoke. In particular, we're going to get some smoke down about here, because that will stop this Squallow from looking in this direction and give me a very unobstructed run with this Hsien warrior. The Hsien warrior is then going to spend basically all of the orders in the first combat group. He's going to come back down the stairs, up and around, up at these stairs, around here, just boing, 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 boing. He will take one face-to-face roll with a Fusilier, which he will put down. He'll actually also be able to lean out and put down the, this is like good range. He is getting pretty lucky here, I will note. Like, fights with multi-rifles can take a very long time, and I think it takes 2 orders to put down the Fusilier. He gets lucky and takes down the Peacemaker in 1. No, I tell a lie. He actually is able to avoid the Peacemaker entirely, but he's able to put down the Fusilier, which will be the only kill he gets this game, but he will use the remainder of his orders to come down the ladder. He will synchronize both HVTs. This is a risk, by the way, of deploying your HVTs like this in this scenario. It is allowable for one model to be synchronized with 2 civilians, and while the advantage of having both of your HVTs together is that you can defend them effectively, if that defense pulls apart, a single specialist model can potentially grab both, which is what the Hsien Warrior did in this case, and then bottled it around this direction. Now, along the way, he attempts a Discover against the Scarecrow, fails needing 17s, thanks you, Goon. But the Scarecrow fairly sensibly declines to ARO, as the Hsien Warrior then just continues his path toward the objective. He takes 3 rolls to evacuate the 2 civilians, but he does eventually get both civilians shot up into space. And at that point, I have like 1 order left in the entire turn, which he then just uses to jump around behind this barricade and go prone. Now, that's going to be a very exposed position, and we can actually see that position here at the end of my turn. We have a Shaolin monk that's made its way up to that position, and then the Hsien warrior. Both of them are hiding behind this barricade. That is not a position that is even remotely safe, but if Owen spends all of his time killing those pieces, it is going to take him, like, that's going to be most of his turn, like dealing with, because the Hacktow is still here. And so dealing with all of these elements is going to take enough time that I don't expect Owen to be able to get these kills and be able to get runs on the board in terms of exfiltrating these civilians, my HVTs, not least because the best piece he has to come up and around here, right, and take the firefight against the Hsien warrior is the Squallow with its multi-pistol, and the Squallow can absolutely synchronize civilians, but it can't, to my knowledge, actually exfiltrate them. It can beep out its little robot, but it remains the one synchronized with the civilians. And while the robot is a specialist, it isn't. The Squallow itself isn't. So you need to find a non-tag specialist to fling these guys up into space through the evacuation console. And that's going to be very awkward with the elements that Owen has here, which will take a long time to move down and around. And that's basically going to be the tail of the tape in this turn. Now, Owen launches a multi-pronged assault on this position. We are going to see three different offensive actions. The Squallow is going to come up and around here. It's going to engage the Hsien warrior from out of cover. It's going to be able to like use the same cover it used in the turn previous to get in underneath the line of sight of the hack tower, not be exposed to danger. It's going to end up in this position here, firing its multi-rifle at this Hsien warrior. It fires the multi-pistol rather. There are a bunch of face-to-face rolls where the Hsien warrior gets kind of lucky. I spang the first armor roll and use that to guts a little bit forward into cover. Now that pulls me away from this side of the barricade and toward to be in cover against the Squallow. That allows the Scarecrow to stand up and put 3 shots into the back of the head of the Hsien warrior. The monk died in like the first exchange against the Squallow. He puts 3 shots into the back of the head of the Hsien warrior, which the Hsien warrior survives, and then the hack tower reveals in ARO against the Scarecrow and kills it. The Griffin then stands up and fights the Hacktow in a very much swallowed the spider to catch the fly situation. But this is a face-to-face roll, which actually, is fairly favorable for the Griffin, but not truly favorable because it's MSV 1 and the Hacktow is Mimetism 6. So the Griffin is blazing away at ballistic skill 12, and the Hacktow lands a hit on a 13. The Griffin does not beat it, and it goes down to a missile. It goes all the way to dead because it was wounded by the Yanho in a previous turn. And so now Owen has no guns other than the Squallow that can really engage anything. The Squallow blazes away against the Hsien warrior for like every remaining order that he has before Owen basically gives that up as a bad job, or I think actually just runs out of orders staring down the wounded Hsien warrior. So all told, that's a pretty catastrophic turn, and it is the kind of catastrophic turn that you can have when you don't have firepower redundancy. Actually, sorry, one thing that is worth noting, because this is a cool showcase of a cool piece about Fennec Fusiliers, I mentioned that the Griffin went down in like the second or first face-to-face roll against the Hacktow. Owen still had orders to spend on that second combat group because it was all one big fire team, plus the Scarecrow. The Scarecrow spent 1 order, the Griffin spent 2. That left 3 orders in that combat group, which he used very cleverly to have the Fennec Fusilier Thunderbolt stand up. Now, the Fennec survived its first face-to-face roll with the Hacktow, after which it was able to use triangulated fire and actually have just as good an engagement, rolling 4 dice on 12s with triangulated fire, completely bypassing the Hacktow's mimetism, actually making it a serviceable backup firepower piece. Now, unfortunately, it is only damage 6, and so I think it hit the Hacktow like 3 times and just didn't do anything, because the Hacktow is an armor 5 heavy infantry, but still a really, really cool play. Now, in this photo here, we can see the beginning of my final turn. We can just barely see the gun. This is an old school Drago on an N2 base, which actually makes it the correct base size to proxy a Squallow. We can see it hanging out here, and I'm going to move to engage it. Now, I could think about how I might try and progress the scenario, but as mentioned, it's very, very difficult for me to do any of my classifieds, and the only like remaining points I could get would be to try and get this civilian out to safety. And since I've gotten 1 civilian clear and both of Owen's HVTs, I'm already on 5 points. That is major victory territory, and if I can just kill all of Owen's remaining guns, there's just no way for him to deal with, like, to get to my HVTs, which means I have the scenario on lock. And so the goal is just, step 1, kill the Squallow, and depending on what orders we have left, if we do it nice and cleanly, maybe we can accomplish more, but just kill the Squallow, because if the Squallow dies, nothing else, right? Nothing else can be done by Owen realistically. The Thunderbolt is dead to the Hacktow. Like, Thunderbolt died to the Hacktow. The Griffin is dead. It's the last remaining gun. So the first thing that we're going to attempt is we're going to have the Hsien Warrior. I'm in cover. The Squallow isn't. We're going to engage with the Hsien Warrior, and the Hsien Warrior dies. I'm not actually particularly surprised. It was a good face-to-face roll, but I'm due for some bad luck after the Hsien Warrior surviving as many goes as it did against the Squallow. It does nothing. That's fine. The Yanho is then going to stand up. It's going to engage the Squallow, who is able to guts into cover relative to it. And then I'm going to take 8 consecutive face-to-face rolls with the hyper-rapid magnetic cannon. We're fighting at about 9 inches, so we are both in 0 range bands, we are both in cover. I am burst 5, Owen is burst 1, I am on 11s, he is on 12s, and during those 9 consecutive face-to-face rolls, I am going to have the Yanho get dropped and recovered by the doctor twice. before I finally, on the ninth face-to-face roll, the Squallow actually just misses completely. The Yanho lands 3 hits and a crit, and the Squallow goes all the way down and dead. But it takes 9 orders from the first combat group, every regular order that I have, and both regular orders in the second combat group recovering the Yanho as part of that so it can continue making face-to-face rolls, but we do put the Squallow down. We do nothing in terms of progressing the scenario. We can't secure the HVT because I've shot both of Owen's HVTs into space, but Owen's last gun is dead. We use the one remaining lieutenant order because, after all, the Hsien warrior went down on the first lieutenant order of the turn, just to move the Moang up to a defensive position here and to move the pheasant into a standing overwatch position here, and that's basically it. All Owen can try and do is to get the Yamabushi forward to score the 1 point that he can potentially score, and he does do that. The Yamabushi is able to basically make a move and then a dodge and then get clear and fire this one civilian off into space. He gets shot along the way. He manages to survive one face-to-face roll against the Moang before eventually dying. That scores Owen a single point, but a single point is not enough to secure the game, and so the game ends 1 point to Kestrel and 5 points to the Hsien warrior lieutenant-led Jing. Now, in terms of assessing the Hsien's performance, technically speaking, he scored 100% of the points that I scored this game. And as we sort of suspected, this kind of a scenario where you need not just a bunch of orders on one turn, but a bunch of orders potentially on multiple turns. I spent pretty much all of my first turn and all of my second turn almost exclusively progressing the scenario. I needed the orders and I needed the lieutenant orders, and so in this very niche circumstance, it was not the worst possible case for the Hsien warrior to show his quality. But would this list have been better if I had just, rather than spent all of those points on the Hsien, just taken a couple of midfield specialists, like literally anything that you might take, or maybe a mobile fire team? Something like a hideout linked to a Moang, a Dao Ying lieutenant. I had the same number of orders, the total cost is cheaper. The Dao Ying hangs out safe in the back. I use the Moang NCO to get the hideout forward. The hideout then synchronizes the civilians and escapes. The hideout is just as durable in that particular circumstance. It's got a shotgun for close range fighting as well. Like, there are just better things that could be done. And the 48 points that the Hsien warrior cost, really, he did fine. He scored 5 points. I can't complain, but I could have spent those points elsewhere and had a list that was kind of overall better. Now, in terms of the other thing I wanted to test, which was the Hacktail, 2 big thumbs up. It was really cool. Didn't get to take an active turn fight with it, but there is always a learning curve to using pieces like this. In this game, I deployed it relatively conservatively. I wanted it near a Yao Zhao. And so basically, anytime I had to take a gunfight, I took it with the Yanho instead. And so I think in a different, slightly more optimized list, I would actually split them apart. Maybe, for example, I would deploy the Hacktail near the Doctor. That was something I was actually considering. I just didn't actually do it. Like, that would be a consideration. There is a learning curve using pieces like the Hacktail, who are just a little bit different to anything else in the game. I'm keen to play it again when I get the chance. One thing I would like to do is to include some elements that maybe obfuscate the presence of the Hacktail a little bit. Maybe it's a bunch more stuff in the midfield. Maybe I even just put an Evo hacker in the list to kind of just fake out that there's going to be a drop troop. I could genuinely see myself doing that, right? I wasted enough points on the Hsien Warrior in this particular scenario. What is 15 points for an Evo hacker among friends, right? When it's like, oh, there could be a shooting star. You should really be careful of that. Pay no attention to the 1.5 SWC that is very visibly missing from my list. Right, there are options. So the Hacktail I'm keen to play a little bit more. I also do want to get around to playing some Yuching lists that use both the Hayate and the Yanho, because that is an awful lot of gun, admittedly 3 SWC, but you're only paying 87 points for the 2 of them, and that is really pretty premium armor piercing, ballistic skill 14, like multiple firepower pieces. That could be very cool to use. I want to try that at some point as well. So overall, some very fun learnings. Will I be using the Hsien Warrior Lieutenant again? Absolutely no. No, absolutely fucking not. I love Hsien Warriors generally, but I love them because they are an MSV2 Ballistic Skill 14 heavy machine gun, not for any of the Damage 7 weapon profiles. So, still, in the interest of good faith and engaging with viewer requests, we have given it a shot, and I think you can absolutely say that scoring 5 scenario points is a perfectly serviceable contribution, even for 1/6 of your list's total points. So there we go. Amraphan, this is my slightly scathing but nevertheless earnest attempt to play the Hsien Warrior Lieutenant. I hope you found it moderately interesting. We did indeed get to see him go out there and do it himself, which is kind of the ideal use case for this guy. For everyone else, just as a reminder, if you'd like to support the channel like Amraphan, you can do so via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below, or by becoming a channel member on YouTube. I take requests, not usually for specific profiles to be tested, but for armies to be played or covered in faction focuses or general questions. I'm always happy to engage with viewers and supporters about any and all aspects of this game. Otherwise, that concludes the video for this week. As always, I hope very much that you have enjoyed it. I will see you next time, back next week, for more Infinity content.